So, welcome to another episode of the Little Marketing Podcast, where we provide you, Australian small business owners, with smart and tangible marketing advice for your small business. So, really excited and looking forward to today's episode. Way too often we see with businesses that we deal with that, potentially they've started out or they're 5 years in, and there's generally no long-term plan or exit path. Today, we're joined by Andy Hoff, who leads the mergers and acquisitions team here at Pitcher Partners in Sydney. So the goal really today is to share a whole lot of information around what that exit path could look like for small businesses here in Australia, the underlying current between marketing and setting your business up for potential sale, and then no doubt many more learnings that Andy has experienced in his 20 plus years in working with businesses. So before we kick off, if you're a first-time listener, who is Little Marketing? Well, we're a marketing consultancy that's been going for almost 15 years, providing marketing plans and advice for Australian small businesses. And you can imagine in that time we've learned so much about businesses, about business owners, what works and what doesn't. So we know that it's more than just a business, it's your livelihood. So based on all of that, these podcasts are in line with the Little Marketing vision of helping you achieve the best possible results for your organization. So let's get into today's episode. Andy, welcome. How are you?
Hey, Michael. I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm very well, very well. How's the week been?
It's been a typical week in an M&A world, so nice and busy. But looking forward to the weekend.
Excellent, good to hear. And business has been well for you?
Yeah, it's going well at the moment. Obviously your listeners will be aware the M&A kind of market is a bit choppier than it was kind of 12 months ago. But we're still pretty busy at Pitcher Partners.
Yeah, awesome. So maybe tell everyone a little bit about Pitcher Partners, what you do and who you do it for.
Yeah, cool. So Pitcher Partners is a top 10 accounting and advisory firm in Australia. So we've got offices in Sydney, Newcastle, Melbourne, Brisbane, Adelaide, and Perth. And our client base is a real mix. It's everyone from a small business owner all the way up to a listed corporate and everything in between. But our focus at Pitcher Partners, I think, where we have a little bit of a competitive advantage is in the mid market. So we're purely, we focus on that mid-market space, and myself, I'm an M&A partner in Sydney. So my day-to-day is basically selling businesses on behalf of our clients.
Yeah, okay. So when you say mid-market, for those that maybe don't know a lot about M&A or mergers and acquisitions, explain what you mean by the mid-market sector.
Yeah, so in M&A, mid-market is typically transactions up to about $250 million in value. Above that, that's kind of, the bigger market where the investment banks would get involved. Yep. But a lot of the work that I do is kind of at the smaller end of the mid-market. So most of my transactions are kind of sub $100 million.
Okay, cool. Very good. Good to know, just so that people have some perspective around what that means and how that can relate to their business. So how long have you been at Pitcher Partners for?
So I started at Pitchers almost 2 years ago now. And prior to that, I've worked in the Big Four accounting firms my whole career. So 15 years at Deloitte prior to Pitcher Partners. And joined the team at Pitchers, as I say, 2 years ago. Yeah,
cool. And how long's Pitcher Partners been going for?
Started in 1991, I think, in Melbourne. A little over 30 years. Yeah, and I think from during that time, we've obviously grown from a relatively small firm in Australia to to obviously one of the top 10 these days. We've got about over 1,000 people nationally and about 300 in Sydney.
Yeah, wow, very good. And so, are there particular types of businesses or industries that you see as a trend in your work day to day, or is it spread across a variety of industries?
Yeah, so in the M&A space, we pretty much play across all sectors and industries. From time to time, you'll see particular themes. So, 3 or 4 years ago, there was a lot of tech transactions. That's kind of come off a little bit these days. But we're definitely sector agnostic and definitely generalist. And what I often say to prospective clients is, we are not experts in your industry, but we are experts at selling businesses.
Yep. And I hear that, like in listening to podcasts myself, a lot of what I hear around that M&A part is that it's actually better to have a generalist, because often there's some, I guess, ulterior motives. And I'm not speaking as an M&A expert, but there's some ulterior motives given some relationships that M&A experts might have within specific industries. Do you want to speak on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think there could be some truth to that. I think, you know, where we play is very much aligned to Picture Partners and our client base. So our client base across the firm is across all sectors, and so we try not to, you know, we have certain specializations. For example, we have a pretty specialized motor industry services team in Sydney, but we try to, you know, offer a broad range of services to a broad range of clients across multiple sectors. And I think the experience that we get from an M&A perspective working across all different sectors is actually really helpful for our clients, because, you know, you pick up things on every single transaction, which then helps you on the next transaction.
Yeah, for sure. And that speaks exactly true to our business as well. Like every day we work with so many different industries and businesses, and you know, our consultants will be asked by their client, "Oh, have you ever worked on this industry before?" They say, "No, but I've worked on 100 different industries," and the amount of knowledge and expertise that I've gained from working with those can only benefit your business and your industry. So agree with that 100%. So we love getting into the tangible bits and pieces for our listeners. So what does Andy's day-to-day look like as a mergers and acquisitions professional?
Yeah, well, the cheesy response is, you know, every day is different.
Yeah.
But I mean, in M&A, there is some truth to that. So, you know, typically you'll be working on a number of transactions at the same time. Ideally, those transactions are at different stages. So you might, you know, in the morning, you might be going out to pitch for a new piece of work. In the afternoon, you might then be working on a transaction which is in due diligence. So, you know, getting into the details with the buyer and helping, you know, the buyer to kind of get to a valuation that, you know, your client is going to accept. And so there's lots of different things that go into it. A key role, obviously, as a partner of the firm is business development. So I spend a lot of my day to day, you know, knocking on people's doors or calling people. And so, you know, what we try and do is, you know, utilize relationships where we have them. So, you know, I think it's and a lot of your listeners will kind of attest to this. I think it's very difficult. You know, pure cold calling is very difficult to actually get cut through. But if there is a little nugget or a little relationship that you can lead the conversation with, that often gets you in the door. And what we often find is, you know, I might ring up a potential client around an M&A opportunity, and actually they're not interested, but what they do need is a tax advisor. So therefore I can bring in one of my fellow partners, or they might need some marketing advice, and therefore we can go to firms like yourselves.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So in dealing with, because you deal with so many different industries and businesses, and we'll get into the mergers and acquisitions kind of bits as we go through today, but in terms of overall, when you look at a business, what are the biggest pain points that you see businesses struggle with day to day in, let's say, in the last 5 years, excluding COVID?
Well, I think one for most businesses is staff. So, you know, clearly the labour market in Australia has been pretty tight over the last few years. And so, firstly, attracting and then retaining, you know, key employees has been pretty difficult for most of our clients. I think that's coming off now. So I think that the market for employees is getting a little bit easier. And, you know, unfortunately, we've been seeing layoffs in certain sectors, but that does help in terms of, you know, the pool of available resources is larger than it was, say, 12 months ago.
Sure.
I think the other challenge we see, particularly at the smaller end of the market, and again, this is not rocket science, but cash. So a lot of businesses we see are very successful from a revenue perspective, but actually, you know, running out of cash is what kills a lot of businesses. And so, you know, at the smaller end of the market, there's normally a disparity between our clients and their customers. So their customers are generally larger corporates, and our clients are smaller. So the larger corporates can obviously dictate when they pay their bills, whereas our clients at the smaller end of the market, they have to pay their staff every half month or every month. They have to pay their rent, they have to pay their insurance, but all these things. So when you look at a business from a revenue perspective, it looks great, and from a profitability perspective, it looks great. But actually, at some point, they just run out of cash.
Yeah.
So I think the more small business owners can start to really hone in on what we call working capital and make sure that that's optimized as much as possible, that will give them enough headroom to grow, and they won't find themselves kind of running out of cash, which is obviously the big killer of lots of small businesses.
And does Pitcher Partners, outside of the M&A part, do they help businesses to think about those things and strategize around that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a private business and family advisory business, PBFA, and they basically have a team of people who do a broad range of things for businesses, audit, tax services, for example, but also things like working capital optimization. So yeah, but there's always an expert at Pitcher Partners who we can put clients in touch with.
Yeah, okay. And so then if we think about some of the clients that you're working on deals with at the moment, do you how are they, let's take the positive ones. What are they doing or behaving in a particular way to keep that positivity? What are they doing differently, say, to all the negative talk that's out there at the moment?
Yeah. So I think that the best kind of sale candidates that we have, they're very focused. So they know exactly what they are and exactly what they're not. So I think a lot of businesses kind of, there's lots of opportunity out there and they go chasing every single opportunity. And that's not necessarily a good idea. So the business that knows where they want to play, how they want to play in that market, how they're going to win in that market, and is really focused on that and lets all the noise kind of dissipate behind them, they typically do quite well. The other thing when you're selling a business is what's the kind of growth story here. So businesses that can kind of articulate that, yes, today we're at, call it $5 million of revenue. We have got a roadmap to get to 20, and this is how we're going to do it. And it's not pie in the sky. It's not, we're going to take over the world stuff, but it's actually, next year we're going to win this customer because we have been for the last 3 years nurturing this customer along the journey. Or, next year we're going to go into Melbourne because we've done some testing of the market in Melbourne and we believe there's an opportunity there. It's those kind of tangible growth things that the actual owner today doesn't need to actually execute on those, but they need a roadmap so that a purchaser can come in and see how they can quickly take the business from 5 to 20 and then beyond.
I like what you said about the incremental change and the small little changes and the testing. I think businesses now, and because of things like social media, they read too much and they think businesses are overnight successes, and that's just not the reality. And you can probably speak more to that as well, but it's just not the reality. And I think businesses need to be realistic around what their goals are, what they can achieve in a certain amount of time, and that things don't happen overnight. Do you agree with that?
Oh, yeah, 100%. And to be honest, a lot of the work we do, certainly up front with clients, is actually looking at their forecast and trying to just peel them back and say, okay, well, if you're projecting to go from X to Y, how are you going to do that? So getting a little bit granular, right? Are you going to increase prices? Are you going to increase the volume of sales? How are you actually going to, do that? What's your view on the market? Are you taking market share, or is the market growing and therefore you're just growing with the market? So I completely agree, Michael, that there's a lot of people get fixated on chasing a dream and chasing an idea, and actually they don't do the incremental things because they're the things that are important. It's not generally the big ticket stuff. It's actually the 1%ers that they add up to growth and sustainable growth as well.
Yep, sustainable, absolutely agree. So in let's call it the last 10 years, what do you think the biggest changes have been for business owners in running their business? What's changed a lot?
So I think, again, a fairly obvious answer that technology has really made it different to how it used to be. So, in the old days, a lot of businesses, even to set them up, you had to spend a lot of money. So, you had to buy expensive equipment. You had to, invest in IT. You had to physically host data in either a server room in your office or a data room somewhere. And the costs were quite prohibitive to actually start businesses in the first place. Whereas nowadays that's almost been flipped on its head. And actually, I could start a business this afternoon, right? I could, it cost me a couple of $100, probably wouldn't be very successful, but so I think that's one thing that has changed. And I think it's hard for business owners that have been in business a long time to be, it's often quite a sobering conversation when you say to them, hey, that piece of that really expensive kind of, might be if you're a marketing business or a business that makes TV commercials, for example, you bought this very expensive camera 10 years ago, right? Nowadays, people are shooting TV commercials on iPhones.
Yeah.
And the editing software, which used to cost $200,000 per year as a license, you can now get that for $9 a month.
Yeah.
And so it's very difficult to have those conversations with owners who've been in business a long time. But obviously, to survive and to then thrive in their market, they need to adapt, and they need to kind of leave that, call it sunk cost behind.
Yep.
And start to, because the competition who are just starting from scratch have got an advantage.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about selling people's businesses. So there would no doubt be people listening who are at a point they're either thinking about selling or they're just starting out. And you can add to this, but I think it's always good to have a plan of some sort, even when you're starting out. What is the end goal? Am I wanting to sell? Am I going to pass it on to my kids? Am I going to pass it on to the rest of my team? What does that kind of exit path look like? So if we talk specifically about selling businesses, what are the motivations or the reasons you see when people come to you that they sell their business?
Yeah, so often there's a succession issue. So it might be a founder who set up the business, 30 years ago, has run the business successfully. There's no kids who are either, want to take on the business or there's no kids. So there's no one in the family to kind of pass the business on to. And so that's kind of quite a common reason for people thinking about sale. The other one, and this is probably accelerated because of COVID, is that people have just decided, hey, what? Running your own business is bloody hard, right?
Yeah.
And so I actually, during COVID, I enjoyed the fact that I could, go and enjoy things and do different things. And actually, that experience of COVID has kind of taught me that, we've got a limited time on Earth. And so I don't necessarily want to run this business for the next 20 years. So if I can find someone to buy it and get a fair price, then now might be a good time to sell. And I think, going back to your original point, Michael, which I think is a really well-made one around having a plan, I think that's definitely important. But what I would say is that when you're thinking about selling your business, you've got to be a bit ambidextrous because, clearly selling it when you want to sell is only half the equation.
Yep.
Often people get knocked on the door when they're not thinking about selling. And that's sometimes the time to entertain an approach, because if you've got someone who's approached you, then you've already got that kind of captive buyer there. And so if you have a captive buyer, that's often where you can, obviously maximize your outcome.
Yeah. Okay. And then, so let's talk about what the process looks like. So we spoke a little bit about the motivation, but let's talk about what the process looks like. So let's pretend that someone hasn't been approached, but they are coming to you and they say, look, Andy, we'd like to sell our business. Yep. Talk a little bit through what that process looks like from that first conversation to when ideally and hopefully they get a fair price, to use your term.
Yep. Yeah. So firstly, that process can be a long process. So what's
the general, like, is there an average time or what does that look like?
Yeah. So an average time would be probably 5 to 6 months from that initial conversation, I want to sell my business, to actually selling the business.
Sure.
But I've worked on deals which have taken 2 or 3 years from that initial conversation to actually sell the business. And I've worked on ones where we've done it in 3 months. Sure. But it's still a long process. But the actual process itself is fairly standard. in terms of there's kind of 4 key parts to it. So part 1 is the preparation phase. So some businesses are really well run and really well set up and kind of ready for sale, we would call them. So, they've got all the hygienes in place in terms of, they've got all their financials up to date. They've done all their tax returns, all the stuff that a buyer wants to know. It's all there. And actually, they're in some ways the best type of clients, because you don't need to spend a lot of time up front doing all that. It's kind of already in place.
Okay.
But for a typical client, you'll need to help them. They might have historical financials, but they might not have any forecasts. So we'll help them build a forecast, for example, because again, the buyer will want to see what we think the business will do in the future, because that's what the buyer is acquiring. They're not acquiring what's happened in the past.
Sure.
It's all about the future. So stage 1 is preparation, and at the kind of the end of stage 1 is what we'd call the marketing phase. So that's where, and again, a lot of your listeners are interested in marketing. That's where we think about, okay, well, how are we going to position this business in the market? What are its key attributes? What are the things that make this business hopefully unique? But if not unique, what are the good things about this business?
Yeah, and hopefully they've done that job for you already. And marketed and position themselves. We talk about positioning a lot on our podcast and resources and stuff. So, positioning 101, go listen to our first podcast. You need to position your business and your brand in a way that is different to the competition. And so tell me why that's important in that sale process.
Well, I mean, if you can't kind of articulate to an acquirer why they need to buy your business, then it's a pretty quick conversation generally.
Yeah.
So there needs to be something.
I'm assuming not in a good way.
Not in a good way, exactly. Yeah. So there needs to. Thank you for the clarification. Yeah. There needs to be some hook that the buyer says, I can see why I need to buy this business, and it could be anything. It could be, this business is really strong in New South Wales, and actually the buyer's strong in Victoria, but doesn't have a New South Wales presence. So it could be as simple as, these guys are established in New South Wales. We want to grow into New South Wales. The best way to do that is to buy something rather than try and grow from scratch.
Yep.
And so it doesn't need to. Often it's not something magical. It's literally just what's good about their business. It might be the fact that they have a really long-standing customer base, and so the buyer can, by buying the business, can then access a new customer channel. It could be that they have developed a particular piece of IP or a particular piece of software, which again for the buyer will be very very valuable. So there's lots of things that it could be. One thing we often find, again, at the smaller end of the market, is the business owner is very wedded generally to the brand of their business, and for good reason, because they have built that brand from nothing.
It's their baby. It's their livelihood, as we say. Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes it's been in the family for multi-generation, so it could be a 100-year brand. 9 times out of 10, the purchaser doesn't see a lot of value in the brand. That's just unfortunately a fact. And so
when you say, can I clarify that? So when you say they don't see value in the brand, can you clarify that a bit more?
Yeah, sorry. So the brand name, particularly, because a lot of people want to sell their business and they want, Michael Cava PLC to continue forever. Yeah. And actually, generally, the purchaser will want to rebrand the business to their. Sure. Otherwise, they've got this multi-brand strategy, and it's quite confusing. So there's a lot of value in what the seller has built over the life of the business. There's not necessarily a lot of value in a particular brand name.
Okay.
From the buyer's perspective. Now, clearly, there's a lot of value in it for the owner. But that's one thing sometimes the owners have to kind of let go of.
Yeah.
Is that brand name.
Are there instances in that? Because I know we're kind of still talking about that step 2 of the process and the marketing and the positioning. So are there instances, though, where a business, for example, sells, I'm just going to make something up, office furniture, for example, and they think, you know what, we have, we sell office furniture to large corporates, let's pretend. And then they think, you know what, we already have a large corporate database. We think we can sell phone systems to them, not even related to office furniture, right? And let's pretend the phone system company is Phone Systems ABC. So do you ever find scenarios where, because Phone Systems ABC is known in the market as the phone expert, that the company that sells the corporate furniture will keep that name because it's there, because people understand what the brand name stands for?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Michael. I suppose I was talking more about where, you've got a similar business. So the
Sure.
acquirer and the acquirer and the seller are similar, and
Okay,
maybe
gotcha.
the acquirer is bigger, so they're kind of taking over. But yeah, absolutely. If there's a particular part of the market which the seller has targeted, and that's a different part of the market to the buyer, then absolutely the brand could continue. And in your scenario, it would seem pretty silly for the acquirer just to get rid of that brand because it's well known in the market.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. All right. So we've spoken about step one, preparation.
Yep.
Step two, the positioning and the marketing.
Yep.
Should we go to step three? What's step three?
So once we're all comfortable with how we're positioning the business, we've cleaned up the hygiene of the business, so it's kind of in a sale ready state. We prepare what's called an information memorandum, which is basically a brochure on the business. So it's got everything that the potential buyers will need to know about the business. So it's got it's got an overview of the business, a history, where it's come from, the types of clients that it has, the types of suppliers it uses. It's got an overview of the team, the facilities, everything you need to know. A detailed financial section, and that's where we kind of add a bit of value in terms of there's quite a lot of call it financial hokey pokey which goes on in terms of what we call normalizing the financials. So often for smaller businesses, there might be kind of non-business related expenses going through the books, which is completely fine. But obviously when you're selling the business, you want to strip those out so that you're showing to the purchaser kind of what the underlying profits of the business are once you take out all the non-business stuff.
So think, for example, say if the business has bought the owner the car, or for some reason the owner booked their holiday through their business, like those types of things.
100%, yeah. So there's that type of stuff, and then there's also the kind of abnormal expenses which sometimes a business incurs, which aren't kind of ongoing. So, for example, you might be selling a business, and 3 years ago it was involved in a court case, so it incurred 100 grand worth of legal costs.
Sure.
So 3 years ago the profits were depressed by 100 grand, but that's not a normal cost of the business. That was a one-off event. So we kind of take that cost out to show that clearly what we're trying to do is enhance how the business looks. But you need justification for it. So what we try to show the picture is what's the underlying performance of the business.
Yeah, and the potential buyers know that you're normalizing it. You're not trying to. There's no trickery or lying or anything in it. They know they're used to knowing that we're going to see normalized accounts. Is that right?
Absolutely. And so there's no. We're not trying to hoodwink anyone here. So we'll show in the IM we'll show this is what the reported profit was. These are our suggested normalization adjustments, and then we'll go into detail about why.
Gotcha.
And then this is the normalized profit, and the buyer can accept or reject kind of our normalizations. But we're very clear in terms of, and very transparent in terms of what they are. So anyway, we've got the information memorandum, and that's when we go out to market. So we agree with our client which parties we're going to approach. So we never approach a potential buyer without first okaying it with our client.
Okay.
Because often, there are relationships and there are things in the market which you need to know about. And, often there are certain people that our client would never sell their business to in a million years. So we obviously wouldn't approach those parties. But this is the fun bit of our job. This is when we get to get on the phones and effectively, put on a sales spiel and try and sell the business and get interest in it. So we have.
So if we talk about that potential list, so is that so do you create that list? Is that list created with your with the seller? Like, is it a combination list that you do kind of collaboratively?
Yeah. So what we normally do, Michael, to get kind of the biggest starting point is we both go away independently and do our own lists.
Okay.
So Picture Partners will prepare a list based on what we know of the industry, based on the connections that we have. The seller will prepare their own list. That's more kind of trade buyers, so other people in the industry. Because our list at the bigger end will have people like private equity and those types of organisations, and then we kind of combine the list and compare them. Because what we want to start with normally, if you're running a process, is kind of a long list, and then you start to have those conversations, and depending on the state of M&A markets, that long list can get whittled down pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Often, you speak to buyers, particularly at the moment, and they say, hey, yeah, that's a cool business. We're just not buying anything at the moment.
Okay.
Because we've got challenges in our own business which we need to fix.
Yeah.
And so we make those approaches. When people say, yeah, we're interested, we get them to sign up to a confidentiality agreement just so that they can't reveal any of the information about our client. And then we give them the information memorandum, and we typically give them 3 or 4 weeks with that IM. We sometimes give them access to management at that stage if they want to have a chat with the owner.
Okay. Yep.
And at the end of that period, we call for what we call indicative offers, which is basically, and I'm simplifying this just for the purposes of time, it's basically you tell us what you're willing to pay for the business.
Okay. Yeah.
And
Cool.
they give you a number.
Yeah. Okay. And then it's back and forth and let the games begin.
Yeah. Then it gets into what's called the due diligence phase. So, let's just say they bid $10 million for the business. In their indicative offer, they'll say that is subject to us checking X, Y, Z. And so that's when you give them the detailed information. It's basically the warts and all of the company. They can check everything they need to check. They generally get advisors involved as well. So you have a tax advisor, legal advisor, accounting advisors, lots of people involved. And so during due diligence, what you're trying to do is maintain their indicative offer price when you're working on the sell side, obviously.
Sure.
That DD period is typically kind of 6 to 8 weeks. Very painful for our client. Typically, we try and do a lot of the heavy lifting, but there are lots of questions, particularly when you've got, so often you take more than one party through to due diligence.
That's what I was going to ask you. Yeah. Is it just one? Does one get the free reign, or can there be two that are doing the forensics?
Yeah, you can. We've had deals where we've had up to 5 or 6 at the same time in due diligence.
Wow.
Which is very painful, but what it does do, it maintains that competitive tension in the process.
Sure.
That's what we're trying to create and maintain, because ultimately that gets the best price for our client. And ultimately that makes us successful as well because of the way our fees work.
Yeah.
But often at that stage you might go with one if you've got one kind of knockout offer, and they typically when someone puts in an offer, they ask for what's called exclusivity, which means they want us to guarantee that no one else is looking at the business. And so there's a bit of back and forth at that stage where you say, hey, if you want exclusivity, you need to give us a bit more money, mate. And so yeah, that's always an interesting stage. And once you get through diligence, you get the bidder or bidders to reconfirm their pricing, so reconfirm their offer, and that's when you then always take a single party through to negotiate the actual legal agreement. So that's, our client will always need a lawyer, an M&A lawyer, because ultimately when you're selling a business, it's a legal arrangement, so you need a legal document that underpins it.
Yeah. Okay. So then, in terms of, when a client first comes to you, let's talk about that kind of the preparation part again. So, is there one part that is always a stumbling block that the seller is not prepared with?
I wouldn't say there's always one, but there are definitely some familiar themes from most of the people we see. So generally, people's financials aren't as kind of tight as we'd like them. So we generally spend a lot of time on financials and tax at the front end, getting that all packaged together. The other thing we spend a bit of time on up front is often potential clients have, let's call it, inflated expectations around value. Mm-hmm. Because they've built this business from nothing and put in 40 years of hard work, rightly they think it's worth a lot of money.
Sure.
So a part of our job at the start is kind of an educational piece to say, hey, what you've done in the past is great, but actually the buyer's going to be concerned with what you're going to do in the future. And this is typically how businesses in your industry get valued. And we share that kind of IP with a potential client up front to say, typically these types of businesses might sell for 4 times EBITDA.
Yep.
So therefore, if you apply that 4 times to your EBITDA, that gets you a valuation of X. Yep. And if your expectation is 5 times X, then again, there's probably not much point going to test the market because we know people won't pay that. So save yourself some money, save yourself some time, and if you want that ultimate valuation, then these are the types of things you need to do, and this is where you need to get to from a growth perspective. to
Sure.
justify that valuation.
You know, you just used an acronym that I reckon 50% of business owners wouldn't know. So it's the earnings acronym. So do you want to just spell out that acronym?
Yeah, so EBITDA, so it's earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization.
Okay, awesome.
And thank you for pulling me up on that, because that's one of the challenges in M&A, which is mergers and acquisitions. There's a lot of acronyms flying around there. But basically, EBITDA is quite important, because when a buyer looks at the business, that's what they're focused on, EBITDA. What EBITDA tries to do, it tries to take out all the accounting noise, which is often in numbers. So depreciation, for example, is effectively just a made-up number, driven, simplifying it. And the guys at Pitch Partners will hate me for saying that. It's a made-up number, which is an accounting entry, but it actually doesn't impact the underlying profitability or earnings of the business. So you basically strip out things like depreciation and amortization. The same with interest costs. If the business has a loan and it's paying a lot of interest, ultimately that's got nothing to do with the underlying earnings of the business. That's just how it's financed. So again, you strip all that out. So you try to give the buyer a kind of view of underlying profitability.
So I recommend everyone that's listening now, go pick up the phone to your accountant and have a session for them to explain EBITDA in more detail. That's my accounting advice. So in terms of, so let's talk about the stumbling blocks in selling a business. What's the biggest, so you get to the point, maybe stage 1 done, 2 done, 3 done. Is there a common theme in the stumbling block of the sale they're not going through? And I don't know how often that happens, but yeah.
Yeah, no, it happens quite often.
Okay.
So that's probably the other thing to make people aware of. When you embark on a sale process, there's a chance that it won't sell. And often that's a valuation issue. So you'll often get offers, but there's a big gap between what the seller wants and what the buyer is prepared to pay. And sometimes that gap can't be bridged, and therefore the transaction falls over.
Sure.
One of the other things we often see, Michael, is when you're marketing a business for sale and when you're going out with your information memorandum, you're giving the purchaser a view on how we think the business will perform in the future. Now, by the time they come to transact, you might be 6 months down the track.
Yeah.
And so the purchaser quite rightly says, well, hold on. In your information memorandum, you said that at this point in time, you were going to be doing X amount of revenue and X amount of profit. And we've actually looked at the actual results over the last 6 months, and you're nowhere near that. So now we don't really have confidence in your forecasts. And again, that all goes back to valuation, because then they'll say, well, when we made an offer, we assumed you were going to hit the numbers you yourself gave us.
Yeah.
And you didn't hit those numbers. So therefore our offer is now reduced.
Sure.
So that's one of the common pitfalls.
Yeah. And I can imagine that in that 6-month period, the business owner has been doing 2 things. 1, trying to sustain and run the business as normal. And 2, dealing with the due diligence around trying to sell the business. So I can imagine that would happen a fair bit.
100%. And that's why, we would always advise anyone to get a professional advisor involved, because they can do a lot of the heavy lifting for you of the transaction. Because the worst thing that you can do as a business owner is take your eye off the ball day to day and focus on the transaction, because the transaction ain't going to happen if the business isn't performing well.
It's not, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Let's talk about mindset and successful business owners. So in your 20 years of doing this, so what is there a characteristic that you see that stands out with successful business owners and those that have gone on for a successful sale?
Yeah, so there's a couple, and I know when John was on a few weeks back, he was talking about hard work, and there's no substitute for that. There's some people get lucky. And don't work hard and are very successful, but most of us mortals have to work pretty hard to have any chance of success. I think going back to the point I made earlier, a real clear focus on what they are and what they're not. I think that's super important. And also, I think business owners that aren't scared of trying new things, but can fail quickly and fail cheaply.
Yep.
And so they might go and test a new market. But it's going to cost them 10 grand to test it, and if it doesn't work, they're going to pull out. You can't. Those people who aren't too proud to say, "Hey, we tried that and it didn't work," they're the people that generally succeed
and move on quickly.
Absolutely. Because there's no I think people who don't try anything new, that they're clearly, the business is at some point going to stagnate.
Yep.
But those guys who get wedded to, this is our strategy and we must execute, and even though it's not going well, 6, 12, 18 months down the line, we're still going to persist because we pumped in so much money, we're just going to pump in more and more and more. Typically, obviously, that doesn't end very well.
Yeah, slow death. So you can leave names and business names and all that out of it and confidential. Any recent M&A success stories that you want to share? Maybe one or two, or
yeah. I've got a couple. So one is very recent. So we advised on the sale of a business which actually only completed a couple of weeks ago. But the interesting thing about that was a sort of one of the points made earlier. That was an 18-month process. So we first started talking to our client, in the middle of 2021. And interestingly, they had already been approached by the acquirer at that stage.
Right.
So there was an initial conversation from my client around, well, why do I need an advisor? I've already got the buyer here. It should be pretty simple from here, shouldn't it?
18 months later.
Always a good conversation to have. If you ask him now, I think he'll say we added a bit of value along the way, but sure. At the time it's kind of difficult to prove up that. So that transaction was it was very messy for multiple reasons. The acquirer was based in the US, so that always makes it harder. So the acquirer wants to use a US legal template, we want to use an Australian one. All those things, just the time difference, all those things are difficult. And ultimately, our client also had a bit of a journey with the business through the transaction process. So they supply medical equipment, and they're the exclusive supplier of certain brands in Australia. And through the process, they lost one of those brands as an exclusive provider. So that obviously had a big impact on both the business, but also the transaction, because one of the key rationales from the purchaser's perspective was, I want access to those exclusive brand arrangements.
Yeah, okay.
So anyway, long story short, that deal actually fell over completely just before Christmas. And then it took a call from the actual principal of the buyer and my client to kind of make things up. And we got it going again over Christmas, which was helpful given that I was in the UK on holiday. And actually that transaction completed, as I say, a couple of weeks ago. So the real story there on persistence and kind of, ducking and weaving and taking the punches along the way, ultimately got to a really successful outcome, both from my client's perspective, but also from the buyer's perspective.
Sure.
So that was a good kind of recent example.
And I'm sure, without tooting your horn, I'm sure it probably wouldn't have happened without a good advisor. Because how does the seller, negotiate all those hairy points in that process alone?
Yeah, I think that's right, Michael. And what we often hear from clients, and other advisors hear this from clients as well, so it's not anything specific to us at Picture Partners, but often clients tell us at the end of the process, Jesus, we could not have done this without you. We didn't actually realize going into it what was involved.
Yeah.
Thank God we had someone like you involved, because we're experts at running our business, right? But we've never done M&A. This is our one deal in our lifetime.
Yeah.
And so, and I often say to those clients, can you come and speak to my potential future clients? Because the challenge we always have is actually telling them the value we add, and the fact that they say, well, you're very expensive. And we try and articulate that, we'll definitely earn that money, but until they've gone through the journey, it's hard for them to see sometimes.
Maybe you need some confidential, some video testimonials from some of the people that have used you and sold you for potential clients. There's a bit of marketing for you. Yeah.
Good idea, Michael. Thank you. Yeah. The other one, just quickly, because I said this too. This is a really great story. Actually, this was 15 years ago. It's my first deal that I did in Australia. Wow. It was actually quite a big deal, and the CEO of the business owns a couple of percent. Really nice guy, worked in the business forever, and so when it came to completing the transaction, it was in the old days where you'd physically get a check. Luckily, it's not done that way anymore. And so when it came to his check, he asked for 2 checks. One was for, I'll just make up stuff. One was for 10 bananas, and the other check was for 5 bananas.
Yeah.
And so I said to him, I said, Jeff, why are you getting 2 checks? He said, come with me. And we literally walked, we're in Melbourne, we walked to, I think it was a Commonwealth Bank, and he gave his check with 10 bananas across the counter and said, I'd like to pay off my mortgage, please.
How good's that?
It was just such an amazing story. And this guy, like he probably aged 20 years during the transaction.
Yeah.
And you could literally, the colour just came straight back into him. You know, he still had his 5 bananas to go and spend as well on a boat or whatever he wanted to buy.
Yeah.
But you could just see that financial freedom had just been lifted from him. And so we don't always, a lot of the stuff we do is kind of corporate to corporate. So it's about effectively corporates, making money effectively for the shareholders or whoever. But when you get those stories where it's an individual and, all we're doing is assisting by 1%. I mean, they do all the hard work, clearly.
Sure.
But when you can be involved in those deals that actually make a difference to people's lives, and that's a great feeling. And we had a couple of beers in Melbourne that night.
Oh, I'm sure you did. And it's that for us here, that's the rewarding bit. It's dealing with those small business owners who, when the day comes and they sell their business, like that's a life-changing moment. They're going to remember now where they were when they were like refreshing their phone to see the money come through, right? They're not going to get a check. And that's a life-changing moment for people. They've worked so hard. There's some great stories there. We joked about marketing, so let's talk a little bit about marketing. So do you know, does Pitcher Partners do any particular marketing, and how does it, we spoke about positioning before for your clients. So does Pitcher Partners position itself in a way, in a particular way so that your clients can think about you?
Yeah, we do. So we have a dedicated marketing team in Sydney, and then we also have the national marketing team who sit in Melbourne.
Sure.
And for us, a lot of marketing is around brand recognition.
Okay.
So we have a strapline, if you will, called which is making business personal.
Okay.
And so that's kind of how we go to market and how we approach marketing. So because we're mid-market focused, it really is about it is personal for a lot of people. It's not just corporates doing stuff. It's actually individuals behind that. So we're pretty focused on marketing, and as I say, brand recognition. We do lots of webinars, lots of thought leadership, lots of LinkedIn stuff. The marketing guys are telling me we've got 33,000 LinkedIn followers, which is I don't know, it's probably not that impressive, but it sounds impressive to me.
It sounds like a good number. Yep.
And so we do kind of actively, and what we're trying to do, I mean, a lot of our work, to be honest, Michael, comes from referrals. So past clients or existing clients of Pitcher Partners who need a different service.
Sure.
But also what we want is there are opportunities and there are situations where we have to effectively pitch for work, and so we need our brand to be out there so that someone, when I call someone up and I say, hi, I'm Andy from Pitcher Partners, that ideally they don't say who's Pitcher Partners.
Sure.
Ideally they've seen our brand.
Yeah. And I agree with that I see a lot of what you guys do, and it is about your brand and reinforcing what you guys do, and just being top of mind to potential clients. What we say to our clients is every day is that your customer, your client might not need you today, tomorrow, or next week, but when the time comes for them to use an advisor or buy a pair of shoes or whatever it might be, if that brand has been top of mind and reinforcing, when the time comes to make a decision, at least you're considered. And then when you're reaching out cold, then it makes it even a bit easier because they know who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, we focus a lot on trying to give, I suppose, potential clients lots of free stuff at first in terms of, as I say, thought leadership, come to this webinar. We're very happy to share, people can call us up and we can have a chat with them about, as I was talking about before, from an M&A perspective, these are the deals that have happened in your sector and this is the typical pricing. We're very happy to share all that collateral up front. Yep. People don't need to sign up to any kind of engagement. We're just happy to have that chat because, to your point, they might not be a client for 5 years, but when they are ready to sell, they can remember there's that guy from Pitcher Partners who's actually quite helpful.
Yeah, sure. And you've got, without giving it a plug, I noticed there's a webinar next week I think you guys are doing, isn't there? So if we release this before the webinar, we'll mention it. Otherwise, once it goes out, I'm assuming the webinar will be probably recorded at that point.
Yep.
So that'll be helpful for people. All right, awesome. There you go, got a free plug.
Thank you, Michael.
No worries, that was good. So in terms of So in terms of your career, so is there anyone, let's get a bit personal here. So is there anyone that you would like to thank for your success in your career so far?
Well, I need to mention one person from our marketing team called Tony, because she actually read that question yesterday and said, just mention my name. So Tony. Uh,
That's
but no,
really
in all seriousness, I mean, there are lots of people who obviously help you along the way. So I've had lots of great, I suppose, mentors along the way, and hopefully I've helped people along the way as well.
yeah.
There's not one person who kind of stands out, but I think, and again, it goes back to something John was saying in an earlier episode around, I think if you're a decent person and you help others, then generally people help you in return. So what I would say to more, I suppose, more junior people starting out in a career these days is you can't wait for your mentor to find you. You've got to be a bit proactive in terms of if you like the way someone operates, go and tell them and go and ask them to kind of help you. And 99.9% of people will be only too happy to do that.
Absolutely. I think generally people like to help others, right? So,
Yeah.
And I say that with the team here, that you can drive your career. No one else is going to drive it for you. I remember starting out 20 years ago, your bosses didn't care about what your career looked like. Now the mindset's a little bit different, and your immediate leaders get training and all that type of stuff. So they're a bit more aware of how they should be looking after their team and advising and all that stuff. So, yeah, great advice there, Andy. Any high or low moments you want to share in your career? I bet you there's plenty of high moments with all the transactions, right?
Yeah, there is. There's plenty of low moments as well. Obviously, when you work with a client for say 12 months and you're very close to completing a transaction and then it falls over at the last minute, that's obviously really, really heartbreaking for them sometimes, in terms of often clients are already kind of thinking about what they're going to do with their money.
Yeah.
And
with their 10 bananas.
With their 10 bananas, exactly. And sometimes that gets pulled away from them. So they're always difficult. But I think the longer you work in M&A, and this is goes with all facets of life, right? You don't get too excited when you have a completion. You don't get too despondent when a transaction falls over. That's just the life of M&A. But yeah, the other thing I would say that's kind of helped me more recently is just really, really tapping into the whole kind of wellness aspect. And I think that's probably helpful for small business owners as well, in terms of focusing on stuff that you can control and focusing on being the best person that you can be. And I know it sounds a bit kind of cheesy, but we often hear from clients, I used to exercise, but these days I'm just too busy. Stuff like that. And it's just actually like all that. When you're too busy to exercise, that's exactly when you need to exercise.
Yeah, for sure.
So simple things like exercise and sleep and all that helps your kind of mentally and clearly. That helps you deal with the kind of peaks and troughs of everyday life.
Absolutely. Is there anything that any piece of kind of advice that you wish someone had given you when you first started your career that you now pass on to others?
Probably get a hair transplant earlier.
Very good. I like
it. Probably in all seriousness, just I think again, when you're starting out, you kind of worry about what ultimately is very small stuff, and it's hard to sometimes detach yourself from work. So I'd have, certainly in my 20s, lots of sleepless nights where you're thinking about a particular issue on a transaction, how is that going to be resolved, or you're going to have a difficult conversation with a client or an employee, and so obviously again with experience you just kind of realize that the stuff that you know about, that's not the stuff you need to worry about.
Yeah, it does sweat the small stuff, as they say.
Yeah, absolutely.
So to finish up, is there a final piece, kind of tangible piece of advice that you can give to a business owner when it comes to selling their business?
Yeah, so it's never too early to start planning. Mm-hmm. What you don't want to be as a business owner is 70 years old before you start thinking about selling your business.
Sure.
Because part of our job is to sell it at a time when you can have a second life and go and enjoy all your hard work.
Yeah.
So it's never too early to start thinking about that transition, it's also never too early to start thinking about, from a seller's perspective, who the logical buyers are, and try to connect with those buyers. Not to say, hey, I'm going to sell my business in 10 years, you should buy it, but just to get close to them, so that when we make the call to that buyer, they actually know, and they've got a good relationship with the seller, and they know the business.
Yeah, that's
so
awesome.
You can start to plant seeds in the buyer's minds, like, very early. And the final piece, Michael, is just around, as an owner, you need to start to replace yourself in the business. If you want to sell your business and sail off into the sunset, then you can't be the guy or girl who has all the client relationships, all the knowledge in their head, because a buyer is going to want you to stay around. So if you want to leave, then start to develop the next level of management underneath you. Start to transition those relationships so that a purchaser can come in and from day one can kind of take over.
That last piece of advice, I hope everyone stayed through the whole episode, because that last piece of advice is, I think, one of the best pieces. And we said final words of wisdom, and I think that was, I think you nailed it right there. Andy, it's been awesome having you on the show. No doubt listeners got plenty out of today, entertaining as well. So thanks so much for your time. I know it's precious.
Thanks, Michael. That was very enjoyable.
All right, mate. Thank you. See you later.
Bye-bye.
Just a reminder, to get even more out of today's episode, go to the show notes to find the link, or visit littlemarketing.com.au, where you can download a worksheet with the key points discussed in today's episode. This is so that you can make your own notes around some of the things discussed, get your marketing moving, and start implementing. Again, thanks for listening and have a great day. Please note that all the information provided on this podcast is general in nature and is not intended to be specific advice to your individual situation. Please be sure to engage a professional for a customized approach to your business and personal circumstances.